Oh yeah. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. I'm back. I apologize for being being gone, but I of course picked up a little case of COVID, but I dealt with it and I am alive and back and ready to go. So you guys of course had a quiz on Monday. How did it go? No? How was it? Think it was okay? Okay. I'll try to get them marked maybe later today. They're in my mailbox. I haven't grabbed them yet, but I'll grab them and mark them, and hopefully I can give them back to you tomorrow. I also gave you some work to do yesterday, but can we review that? No? Yes? Came all the way back to see you guys. You're not going to talk to me? Cold War. All right. So we of course were talking about the Cold War as of last Thursday, right? And we said that we were kind of in a period where the tension between the U.S. and the USSR was kind of declining a little bit, right? Because Stalin had died, and of course Stalin was a monster. He was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who could be, kind of belligerent and, forceful, but he was also kind of a nicer guy. He was a much nicer guy than Stalin, right? And so we saw during this kind of period of from 1953 to about 1960, relations kind of started to warm up a little bit, right? The United States, President Eisenhower, he invited Khrushchev to come to the U.S., right? And we saw him arrive and get toured around, and he met lots of Hollywood celebrities and toured the country and probably had a great time, right? And so when he went home, he said, long live the spirit of American-Soviet friendship. He cut his military budget as kind of a symbolic gesture of, hey, maybe we're kind of friends, right? Or kind of starting to be friends now. And that kind of carries through all the way until about 1960 or so. And I'm kind of just riffing here. I don't remember what the questions are. But what happens in 1960 that kind of sours this relationship? What happens? I'll give you a hint. Yeah, they shoot down a U-2 spy plane, right? The pilot is Francis Gary Powers. He is captured, right? He's taken alive. The plane wreckage is showed to everyone, and Khrushchev, who has suspected this, but now he's got proof that the U.S. has been spying on him, right? And so they've been flying over at super high altitude, right? 70,000 feet, taking pictures of the Soviet Union. And what kind of important piece of information did the Americans learn from those spy flights? Pardon me. Yes, but just before that. Maybe this is a small detail. I'll help you out with this one, and then we'll get to Cuban Missile. So they actually learned that the Soviets' nuclear capability was not quite what the Soviets were bragging about, right? Khrushchev was like, if you cross me, I'll launch missiles at every U.S. city, and destroy them all. But the Americans find out that, actually, he doesn't really have the missiles to be able to do that, right? He has nuclear weapons, but you have to be able to deliver those weapons to the target, right? And the Soviets don't have missiles that can fly that far and land with precision, right? And so the Soviets have been kind of bragging about this for a while. The Americans have been kind of worried about it for a while, but those spy planes or those spy flights showed them that actually, the Soviet Union isn't quite as strong as they pretend to be. They don't actually have that missile capability, right? But when that plane gets shot down, it kind of sours the relationship, right? Khrushchev is like, how dare you spy on me? You know, I expect you to, morning Ryan, I expect you to apologize and stop these flights. And of course the Americans don't apologize, and Khrushchev is like, fine, friends off, right? And so it's kind of a chilly period, and Khrushchev says he's not actually going to he's not going to deal with President Eisenhower again. And so they're kind of not talking to each other until John F. Kennedy is elected in, I think, 60 or 61. And then they sort of begin to talk again. But then, as you can see, we get into this whole kind of Cuban Missile Crisis thing. So let me jump to question 27 here. So what was going on? Why was the Soviet Union, how was the Soviet Union connected to Cuba, and why did Khrushchev want to put missiles there? Let me start with Anna.
It was about one Fidel Castro power.
Yeah.
So they had like a really coordinated power, and that's how they got related.
Yeah.
And then Khrushchev wanted to put missiles there because they wanted an advantage from the USA.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you imagine how happy Khrushchev, pardon me, how Khrushchev would have been to see that a communist revolution had happened basically right in the United States backyard? Khrushchev was like, woo-hoo-hoo, right? How exciting, right? And so when Fidel Castro takes over Cuba, Khrushchev and the Soviet Union are very quick to recognize him as the official government. They commit to helping him and forming a partnership. And then, of course, he says, hey, can I station some missiles on your island, right? And literally, if you look at the map, is there a map in the book? No, of course not. If you look at the map, you'll see that Cuba is very, very close to the southern United States, right? They are basically in the backyard of the United States. And so if Khrushchev has missiles stationed there that are pointed right at the United States, well, then he's going to have some leverage, right? He's going to have some bargaining power. He's going to have the gun pointed right at the United States, right? And I think, as Regina mentioned a few minutes ago, one of those U-2 spy planes flying over Cuba pretty quickly detect that that's what's happening, right? There are missile sites being constructed. And I think I've got, this is apparently it. These are the pictures that are taken from the U-2 spy plane, 70,000 feet up. It doesn't look like much to me, but then of course if you're an expert in interpreting aerial photography, you'll have a better idea. But yeah, this is what the Americans see in 1962, right? And so very quickly they realize that the Soviets are constructing missile sites, and it's pretty hard to see what's going on, eh? So yeah, he's looking for a position of power, right? And so these two sides are always trying to either balance each other out or try to get a leg up on the other side, right? Either with more weapons, more sophisticated weapons, or by placing weapons in strategic spots that are very, very close to that country, right? And as you can see, the US already has these Jupiter missiles installed in Turkey. Turkey's pretty close to the Soviet Union, so really the Americans are already in the Soviet Union's backyard already. And so here, Khrushchev has the opportunity to station his missiles in America's backyard, and then he'll be able to kind of push with a little more force, right? But again, unfortunately for him, the Americans find out before the missiles get there, right? So there's no missiles there now. They're just constructing the site, right? They're constructing the launch pad. And so how does the United, well, I think it goes without saying that the United States is concerned about this idea, right? But what do they, What are their options? They know that the Soviet Union is building missile launch sites in Cuba. What are their options? David, what's one option? What's one thing they can do? Well, actually, it's funny that you bring up invasion because they do invade earlier, right? Does it mention that in the textbook? Does it mention the Bay of Pigs? Bay of Pigs? A little bit, yeah, so a little bit earlier, before this, Castro overthrows the government, right? There's a communist government, and the Americans are like, ugh, I don't know if we want a communist government so close to us. Let's try and get rid of this Castro guy. So they outfit a bunch of Cuban people who had left, who had come to the United States. They outfit them with guns and military, and they send them in. They land them at the Bay of Pigs, which is a place in Cuba, and their job is going to be to infiltrate the government and overthrow Castro's regime, right? So it's a secret military operation, you know, highly trained operatives. They're going to take out Castro and overthrow the government. It's a complete disaster and an embarrassment. They don't even get off the beach. They're caught by the Cubans, and President John F. Kennedy looks like an idiot because he attempted to overthrow a government, and it just didn't work at all. So it was very embarrassing for everyone involved, but they did try to overthrow the government before this, but it just didn't work. Poorly planned operation. But now that these missile sites are being created, what can they do, the Americans? What's option A? Diplomacy. What does that mean?
Like, try to negotiate.
Yeah. Right? To be diplomatic, right? Hey, we see you're building these missiles here. We're not really in favor of that. Can we talk about it, right? Can we negotiate some way that you don't do this, right? Diplomacy, good. What else can the Americans do? What's option B?
Isn't there the one that is it action?
It could be what?
Airstrike or invasion?
Yeah, right? So the Americans could they could play hardball, right? They could either go in and bomb these sites, or they could try to invade the island, right? So full military response, right? Kind of the opposite of diplomacy, right? Let's talk it out versus we're gonna bomb you. What's the third option? It's in the
Miles use of military forces.
yeah.
The close Cuba to Soviet ships.
Right. So the third, oh, sorry, hang on. Too many masks. Okay. So the third option is kind of in between the two, right? So yes, we're going to put some pressure on them diplomatically, but we're also going to use our military to kind of isolate the island and keep the missiles from coming to Cuba, right? And so they kind of they talk about this still, and I'll mention it because we still use these words. They use birds, right? What are the bird names they use?
Dogs and
Right. So there are the hawks, right? And the hawks want to do the military thing, right? So you can imagine a hawk, right? Like a predator with talons and a sharp beak. And we still use this when we talk about people who are in favor of military action all the time. Those people are hawks, or they're hawkish about, let's say you were hawkish toward Russia, right? If you were hawkish, that means that you favor going in with the military and sorting it out with guns and bombs, right? That's being hawkish. The second one you said were owls, right? How do we think of owls? What are owls supposed to be? Yeah, they're calmer, they're more intelligent, right? They're wise, right? Often we think about owls as being wise. So here these people are owlish, right? So they're like, yeah, let's just intellectually talk it out, right?
I think the owl is the middle.
Oh, was the owl the middle? Oh, you're right. The owl was the middle. Shoot, you're right. Sorry, I got confused. It's my first day back, you know. I'm a little out of it, a little nervous, you know. Regina's right. The owls are the ones that are in the middle, right? And so they're the ones who want to use some military force, but also in a careful, measured way. And then, of course, the doves are the ones that want to talk it out, right? And doves are birds of peace normally, right? So we can still kind of use these metaphorical animals to talk about how people feel about things. Maybe not so much doves and owls, but definitely people are talked about as being hawkish still. So we've got these three options that the Americans can choose from, and what do they choose to do? Which option do they go for? The what?
The last one. Owl?
Yeah, the owl option, right? So the idea here is that the Americans will this is an odd word now, quarantine Cuba, right? And they'll have their warships all around Cuba, and they won't let any Soviet ships in, right? So regular ships coming in with, you know, food or whatever, or tourist ships, they can come in and go, no problem. But the American warships are there to stop the Soviet ships from delivering those missiles, right? So how does this get resolved? How does this thing get resolved? Actually, wait. Let's not ask that question yet. I feel like the textbook doesn't do a great job of explaining how kind of intense a situation like this was. The textbook is very like, oh, this was happened, and then blah blah, and then it was over, and you know, it's not very exciting. But really, this was a super tense situation, okay? And so the American warships are lined up there. The Soviets are headed over with their missiles, and really nobody knows what's going to happen, right? There are nuclear armed subs on both sides, right, protecting the ships. There are bombers in the air with nuclear weapons ready to go. And in fact, during this Cuban Missile Crisis, the Americans are flying around in their nuclear bombers, right, on full alert. And they actually ask if they can land in Canada and refuel and maybe go to other places. And the Canadian government actually says no, which really didn't, the Americans were really not happy with us for a little while after that. But they were kind of on full alert. And the Soviets were on full alert too. And keep in mind, they're, you know, slowly headed towards each other, right? And nobody knows what's going to happen, right? Are the Soviet ships going to just stop and turn around and go home? Are they going to try and ram their way through? Are they going to shoot? If they shoot, is that a declaration of war? Does that mean launch all of your weapons? If they don't stop, then what should the Americans do? Should the Americans attack, or should the Americans just let them go? What's going to happen, right? These two sides are kind of coming together, and something's got to happen here, right? But nobody knows what will happen, right? It's a game of chicken, if you will, right? Do you know what games of chicken are about? Do you know what that means? When you play a game of chicken with someone, you do something to see who will chicken out first, right? Who will be afraid and stop doing it, right? And so here, this is kind of a game of This is a game of nuclear chicken, right? We'll see who's going to get scared and run away first, right? Or who's going to get scared and shoot at who first. And of course, it's very, very dangerous, right? Both of these sides have all kinds of nuclear weapons that they can launch. They can destroy all kinds of cities and people, and it's terrifying. And, you know, these ships are kind of creeping toward each other, right? And so for several days, the world is literally on edge, right? Waiting to see what's going to happen when the Soviet ships arrive here, right? And it's a big deal. But I'll tell you what, hang on a second here. Hang on a second here. Just want to check what slide I have. Right. Let's watch a bit of that documentary. And what we'll do is we'll watch from an hour and 24 minutes and 10 seconds to an hour and 41 minutes and 31 seconds. Okay, so that's the video. There we go. That's the video that's in Microsoft Teams under Files, the one that we've been kind of watching. And just this little section deals with Cuban Missile Crisis. So we'll get to see some footage from it. We'll get to see some of the people involved, and maybe we'll get a sense of the tension. Because again, the book kind of treats this as a, you know, oh yeah, and on Tuesday there was a missile crisis. And anyway, but it's actually way more tense, I think, than the book gives it credit for, and it's probably the closest we've come to a nuclear war happening. Okay, although there's been lots of other points too that have been little accidents that have happened, but this is the closest I think that we've ever come. Okay, so we'll watch this and then we'll come back and answer that question of how this thing actually gets resolved. Okay, so again, for Alicia, if you're online, the video is in Microsoft Teams under Files, and then just watch that section and then we'll come back here, okay? So, do you want to take a little break? And then we'll come back, we'll clean that up, and we'll talk about the other half of the assignment, and then, yeah, you want to do that? Okay, let's take a break. Okay, and we are, and we, whoops, and we're back. So, how does this Cuban Missile Crisis thing get resolved?
Oh, yeah, Khrushchev and Kennedy made an agreement, like, where Khrushchev would remove the missiles from Cuba, and
Yep.
Kennedy would secretly remove the missiles in Turkey.
Yep. Yep. And he promised not to invade Cuba, right? So yeah, they work out a bit of a deal, right? And actually, I don't know if it says in here or where it says, but it's actually really, it's not so much Khrushchev and Kennedy as it is the ambassador from the Soviet Union, Anatoly Dobrynin, and I believe Secretary of State Robert Kennedy. And they kind of meet behind the scenes, they kind of create an agreement, and then these leaders, kind of they agree to it, right? And so what kind of lessons were learned here? We had this big kind of near situation where these two sides with nuclear weapons are slowly moving into conflict, and then an agreement gets made, and everybody can just relax, right? But what kind of lessons were learned from this Soviet-American conflict?
Like they understood that they're both Japanese weapons, and they confused with
Right. So yeah, there was this realization that holy cow, that was close, right? Did people not say holy cow? Is that a normal thing to say? Okay, anyway. People say, yeah, holy cow, this is really dangerous. Both sides have nuclear weapons. We could have had a full-on nuclear war where everything got destroyed. Whew, that was close, right? Which again, I don't know why they didn't think of that earlier, right? These guys have been building nuclear weapons for 12 years now, or more. You think it would have occurred to them earlier, but anyway, this was kind of a wake-up call, right? Holy smokes, that was close. We need to be a little more careful here, right? These weapons are really dangerous. What else was learned? What else was learned from this little episode? Anna, what do you think? Yeah, the value of diplomacy, right? Turns out that it is useful to talk to people, right? If you're having a conflict, you need to sit down and negotiate some kind of agreement, right? You don't have to go right to the weapons every single time, right? There is a value to diplomacy. Good. What else did we learn? Or did they learn? We can learn it too, but yeah? Or either one.
I think America was like they need to be more committed to the
Okay. So the Americans felt that they will have to make a bigger commitment to NATO, right, and support them militarily. Okay, that comes out of it. What else comes out of this? There's maybe two more things. Two more things. The what? Oh, okay. Not a lesson learned, but it definitely comes out of this, right? So the idea that, like Avi told us, that both sides kind of realize, wow, we have some really dangerous weapons here. That was a really dangerous situation. Maybe we need to start to limit them, right? And so they sign a partial test ban treaty that is kind of on the path to limiting nuclear weapons, right? So first they'll agree, okay, we're not going to test them in the atmosphere. Later they'll agree not to proliferate them, right? So we won't spread this technology around. We'll just keep it for ourselves. We won't help other countries develop it. I think they learned something about saving face. Do you know what that means? To save face? No? No? Say again? Yeah, right? When you have lost face, you've been humiliated, right? You've been embarrassed. You've been kind of like dishonored in some way, right? So the important thing here is to create a situation where both leaders can step back, right? Both leaders can say, okay, I'm backing off here, but they can do it in a way that doesn't humiliate them, right? It would have been really bad if one leader was like, yeah, we won, and the other leader was like, oh God, we lost, right? Nobody wants to do that, right? None of these leaders want to look weak or look like they've been defeated, right? So we needed to give these two leaders a way to step back and save face, right? To not be humiliated, to not be embarrassed, right? And so that was an important part of that negotiation, right? You agree to something, we'll agree to something. Everybody kind of takes their hands off their guns and steps away. And nobody has to look like the loser, right? Nobody has to look embarrassed. Good. The last one is the establishment of a hotline between the White House and between the Kremlin. So they actually build, and I think this is true, they actually build in a red phone in the White House. And so when you pick it up, it goes right to the Kremlin. And so the two leaders, the President of the United States can talk directly to the leader of the Soviet Union so that there's no confusion, right? So if somebody's doing a nuclear test, or if there's some sort of mistake or error, or the US picks up something weird on their radar, they don't have to hit the nuclear launch button and destroy the Soviet Union. I know this sounds ridiculous to say, but they can simply pick up the phone and say, hey guys, is everything okay? Are you testing something? We're seeing this on our radar. Is that you? What's going on, right? So these two sides can actually directly and easily communicate with each other just to make sure that there's no misunderstandings, right? Because you don't want an accident to lead to a catastrophe, right? If you've ever heard there's a song from the 80s, because it was the height of kind of nuclear fear. There's a song from the 80s called 99 Red Balloons. And it's a kind of a poppy, rocky song, very popular in like the early to mid 80s. But if you listen to the song is about a balloon showing up on someone's radar, and then one side thinks it's a nuclear weapon, so they send all their weapons, and then the other side sends all their weapons, and it destroys the entire world. Kind of bleak for a pop song, right? But again, people were concerned about this, right? But again, with the establishment of that hotline, both leaders could pick up the phone and say, hey, what's going on? Are you doing anything? Are you launching a weapon at us? And just to make sure there's no misunderstandings, right? Because accidents and mistakes can happen, and you don't want them triggering an end of the world kind of conflict, right? For no reason. But again, this one was close, and I don't think the book does a very good job of driving home just how tense and scary this was, because anything could have happened, right? Khrushchev could have said to his ship, what do you call them, captains, could have said to his ship captains, look, you're going to Cuba. If the Americans try and stop you, launch weapons, right? And if they did, we could have had a massive conflict, right? Or Kennedy could have said, if those Soviet ships won't stop, you fire on them. And that could have started something too. So it was really tense. And thankfully, both of these leaders, you saw that there was a telegram from Khrushchev that they read off. both of these leaders saw the value in diplomacy, right? Both of them saw the value in talking about it and saying, okay, we're both going to step back and not turn this into, not let this get messy, right? Can you imagine Trump doing that? I don't know, right? This is why the leader is important, because day to day, yeah, politics is pretty boring. But when it becomes not boring, you really want someone who is calm and measured and will do the right thing, right? And Kennedy, I think, he does the right thing. And so does Khrushchev, right? Khrushchev is wise enough to say, okay, let's not blow this up, right? And again, Khrushchev kind of got what he wanted, right? He wanted those missiles out of Turkey. He got the missiles out of Turkey, right? And so maybe the whole thing was a negotiating tool for him, but still dangerous, right? And really, really bringing things really close to the edge. Scary. Okay, so that's this is the stuff we just talked about. Oh yeah, there we go. Yep, that was that. Okay, and then yesterday I asked you to read this section as well. Let me just have a quick look at what these questions are before we continue. Right, Brezhnev, Czechoslovakia. Oh, we're talking about Czechoslovakia already too. 5 and Prague Spring. Okay. So, before we dive into this, I wanted to talk to you about the final project and the presentation. So, I would like to revise the date that the sources get turned in, because I want to talk to you guys about that tomorrow. Okay. But I did want to ask, honestly, be honest with me, how are you guys doing? Have you kind of done anything yet? Have you thought about it? Or did you just kind of put it on pause for a while? Put it on pause? Put it on pause? Okay. So maybe what we should do tomorrow is, you know, we'll deal a little bit with this, but I'll talk to you a little bit about sources and finding good ones. I'll try to point you in a few right directions for looking for material. I'll talk a little bit about formatting and things like that. And then maybe I can give you some time to do a little research and see what you might want to write on. Because I think the earlier that you can sort that out, the better, right? Just in case you pick something, I think probably all of us have chosen something and then we're like, oh, this isn't a good topic, it's not working, or I don't like it, or I can't find anything. And so the sooner you kind of figure out what you want to do and start looking, the better, because then if it doesn't work for you, you have more time to switch, right? If you wait too long, then sometimes you're committed, right? For better or worse. Say one more time? Yes? Am I going to mark them?
No, I think you're marking them.
Oh, no, I'm going to change that date because I was out for a few days and we're a little bit behind. So I will change that. We'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll set a new due date for that because I need to explain a few more things to you. So don't worry about that. Yes, ma'am? It's in the? Yes. Yeah, I'd like you to do it individually, please, if you can. Yeah, so that's what I'd like to do tomorrow. I'll also try to get the quizzes marked for tomorrow too, so maybe we can get some housekeeping done, because let me just see where we are here. Everything's been a blur. Okay, so 1, 2, wow. Wow. Okay, we're gonna have to move. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do tomorrow. We are gonna get started on the project. We're gonna try and find we're gonna find a topic, and we're going to proceed to look for some sources and get them formatted, okay? Because we've got We got to get moving, right? That's what we'll do tomorrow. Okay. In the meantime, let's talk about what's happening here with these questions. So we said that Khrushchev kind of stepped down, right? The Communist Party had felt like, he'd embarrassed himself, right? Even though I think we could probably agree that he did the right thing with Cuban Missile Crisis, right? He stepped back, he didn't start a nuclear war. He did kind of get one of the things that he wanted, right? He did get those missiles out of Turkey, although they were going to be removed anyway because they were obsolete, but don't tell him. So he got what he wanted, right? He negotiated it out, didn't start a war, no big deal. But the Communist Party felt that he kind of embarrassed himself. They felt that he kind of did lose face, that the Soviet Union looked weak in that exchange. But also, as you can see, agriculture hasn't improved in the Soviet Union, right? The Berlin situation is still the same. Khrushchev put up a wall, which was an embarrassment as well, right? And so the Communist Party just felt like he was dropping the ball, right? And so they push him, they pressure him to step down, which he does. And as you can see, he thinks this is, pardon me, my throat's dry. He thinks this is progress, right? He says nobody would have suggested to Stalin that he stepped down. Good Lord, right? He'd have you murdered. But Khrushchev is like, the fear is gone now, right? You can ask me to step down and I will. And he does. And he's replaced by Brezhnev, who is not a handsome man, but that's beside the point. So what kind of struggles, what kind of challenges does Brezhnev have when he takes control of the Soviet Union in 1964? What's one challenge that he has?
Soviet difficulties with peace and enormous debt to the Western continent.
Their challenges with food? Did you
What
say?
is that? Oh, maybe.
What were his challenges? The what? The- Okay, so the Soviet Union is heavily in debt to Western countries. Okay, that's one. Okay, what else? Excuse me, sorry.
The struggle with food supplies.
Okay, so they're still, Regina? They're still struggling with food?
I think I agree.
No, you're right, but I'm just saying, like, still? Because wasn't that the problem before the Russian Revolution? There was food shortages, and then after the Russian Revolution, there were food shortages, and then under Stalin, there were food shortages, and now under Khrushchev, there's food shortages, and Brezhnev still has to deal with it? Yikes. It's, what's that? Like now? Well, we'll see how the sanctions do. No. There's, food is pretty common. Although in the Soviet period, it was not. There's lots of kind of very dark Soviet jokes. There's like a joke where a woman goes into a Soviet shop and she says, "Excuse me, do you have any cheese?" And the guy behind the counter says, "I'm sorry, miss, this is the shop that doesn't have any meat. The shop that doesn't have any cheese is across the street." Ha ha ha. She's looking for cheese. She says, "Is there any cheese?" And she's like, "No, we're the shop that doesn't have meat. The shop that doesn't have cheese is across the street." Because none of the shops had anything. Right? Well, they would often run out, right? You'd often have to line up. Sometimes you would get food, sometimes you wouldn't. The food was quite basic, right? Like basic vegetables, bread, meat, maybe some cheese, sugar. Right? It was very kind of simple food, and often they ran out, right? Often there just wasn't really enough to go around. And so there was lots of lines, unfortunately. Going to the grocery store wasn't walking around with a shopping cart. It was standing in line waiting to see if you could get what you needed for the day or for the next few days, right? So, yeah, so food shortages persist really from Tsarist Russia basically all the way into the 2000s, right? It's really only, well, maybe into the 1990s or so. But before that, food is a real challenge. The Soviet agricultural system underperforms for decades, right? Decades and decades. Meanwhile, they're exporting grain, right? They're selling grain on the open market because they need to convince people that communism is working, right? That they have lots of food, but yet it's not happening, right? And so in doing so, they're incurring some debt, right? They owe other countries money, right? Which again is kind of where we were with Tsarist Russia, right? Tsarist Russia had massive foreign debt as well. So yeah, lots has changed, but it seems like some things remain constant, right? What are some of Brezhnev's other challenges? He's got agricultural issues. He's got debt issues. He's got a unibrow. No, I'm just kidding. He's got a tweeze constantly. No. What are his other challenges? I thought you guys did this. Come on. Other challenges. Well, there's still a Cold War on, is there not? Yeah. There's still a Cold War, right? So he still has to negotiate with the Americans, right? He's still got to try to stay on top of the Americans and make sure that they don't get the better of the Soviet Union. But what's also happening, I think, during this period is that military spending is starting to get to the point where it's a lot, right? The Soviet Union is trying to keep pace with the American military, but America is a much richer country, right? Their democracy capitalism system seems to be very, very productive, right? As opposed to the communist socialist system. And so the Americans have tons of money. They're rich, right? And they pour tons of money into their military. But the Soviet Union is not so rich, yet it's trying to pour the same amount of money into its military and its arms as well. And so who's kind of paying the cost for that? The Soviet Union and the regular people, right? So again, I think I mentioned last week, but the quality of life between American citizens and Soviet citizens is really big. There's a really big gap, right? So in the 1970s, the American quality of life and the Soviet quality of life is the same as the Americans in the 1920s, right? So basically they're 50 years behind in terms of their quality of life, right? They're living a very basic existence, and they're doing it because all of that money that is kind of in the consumer economy in the US, it's all being poured into the Soviet military, right? Just to keep pace with the Americans. And so, you know, the Soviets are kind of trying to keep up with the Kardashians, right? But the Kardashians have lots of money and the Soviets don't, right? So, yeah, Brezhnev he's got issues, he's got problems. Sorry, my throat's just a little dry. We start to see some changes in Eastern Europe again in 1968. So remember when Khrushchev gave his Many Roads to Socialism speech? All of Eastern Europe was like, oh, okay, we want some more freedom, right? We want some more economic and political freedom. Countries like Poland gets a little bit of freedom. Countries like Hungary do not, right? They get squashed by the Red Army. But here again, in the sort of late 1960s, countries start to push back again. And what's happening in Czechoslovakia during this period? What's happening in Czechoslovakia? Nothing? Nothing's happening in Czechoslovakia? Business as usual? What's happening, Anna? Okay. There's a Prague spring. Have you ever heard like a spring referred to in this way? No? A number of years ago there was an Arab Spring in Egypt. Yeah, sometimes they like when you have like a political system that's really like repressive and controlling, and when that control gets less and people get a little more freedom, it's like spring, right? So there's kind of something happening here in Czechoslovakia, the Prague Spring, right? So we see the coming to power here of Alexander Dubček as party secretary in Czechoslovakia, and he wants more freedom for the people of Czechoslovakia, right? So Dubček is willing to suggest and try to create reforms, and kind of what happens, or wait, not what happens. What is he suggesting? What kind of freedoms does Alexander Dubček want to put into place? What does he want to do? On March 4th, let's see, liberal changes. Censorship of the press, radio, and television were abolished. What does that mean? What does that mean? What? I'm on page 201. I'm on page 201 on the far right side. What does that mean that they abolished censorship of the press? What does that mean?
Like the media can say whatever they want.
Yeah, when the press is censored or heavily censored, it means that there's a lot of things that they cannot say, right? For instance, they can't criticize communism, or they can't criticize the communist government, right? But Alexander Dubček says, you know what? We're getting rid of censorship. The press can say whatever they want or feel they need to say. That's big, right? That's a big thing. What else does he suggest here? Even more alarming to the USSR was the tolerance of non-communist organizations with the potential of developing into political organizations. Yeah. So communist countries are one-party states, right? They have one political party and that's it. You can't just get together and form any group you want in a communist country because the Communist Party controls everything. But Alexander Dubček says, actually, you can do that now, right? You can form your own group and get together and meet, and that group can try to do things. Right? Interestingly, some of the first groups that start to appear are human rights watch groups that are going to try to monitor human rights abuses in the Soviet bloc. But he's like, yeah, you can do that now. Oh yeah, there we go. On April 5th, rights to travel abroad. So you couldn't travel, you couldn't leave the country without a permit from the government before. Now you can freely leave if you want. Freedom of speech. Oh gosh, they didn't have that before. Now they do. And the rights to free press are guaranteed. And the party announced that the system of appointing bureaucrats only from party ranks should be abolished, meaning that you could actually get people in the government who weren't part of the Communist Party, right? You could have non-communists working in the government, right? This is huge, right? These are big, big changes for Czechoslovakia, and they really go against, that's how the Communist Party controls people, right? I think I asked you on the quiz, how does the government in V for Vendetta, how do they control the people? Well, part of it is through the media, right? Through the British television network. And of course, they use curfews, we said. But here, they also make sure that you can't create other associations that are not communist parties. Here in Czechoslovakia, all members of the government are from the Communist Party, right? You don't have freedom of speech. You can't criticize the government. You can't criticize communism. But here, Alexander Dubček says, that's all over, right? You can say what you want. You can leave the country. You can express your views. If you think the Communist Party are a bunch of idiots, you can say it. You can print it. It's all good, right? But again, those are the methods of control for the Soviet Union and for communist governments, right? That's how they control people. Alexander Dubček saying we're getting rid of all of that, right? Hence the spring, right? Fresh air. People are like, finally, spring, right? So how does that go for Alexander? Regina's giving me the head shake, like, what happens? It didn't happen, right? So those changes were going to be approved, right? But then on August 20th, a Soviet invasion, right? Tanks, armored carriers roll in, 250,000 soldiers, 1,000 aircraft, 7,500 tanks. So they roll in and basically crush this, right? They take control of Czechoslovakia. Dubček is thrown in jail, and they install a hardline, repressive communist government, right? Which is kind of the same thing that happened to Czechoslovakia very early on, right? Remember, it was under Stalin. They had some elections where there were some communists in the government, but some non-communists. And Stalin had them removed or killed, and he put in a very hardline government that was loyal to Soviet Union. And here, kind of the same thing happens, right? Alexander Dubček manages to get himself in the main chair, tries to make all these changes, but right before he makes them, the Soviet Union comes in with the Red Army, squashes the revolution again, throws him in jail, and installs somebody who's friendly to them, right? And so, yeah, interesting. We're seeing the same thing kind of happen. It's Hungary all over again, right? Or it's Czechoslovakia all over again, or maybe it's both. But again, we still see that the Soviets are willing to use brutal force to preserve their control over these countries, right? Whew. Okay, so I think that's about all I have for you today. I know we have a couple minutes left, but I'm going to let you sneak out early. Tomorrow, hopefully, quiz review and starting on the project stuff tomorrow, okay? I'm actually going to try to dedicate most of the class to that tomorrow so that you have some time and so that we can get rolling, because we are on the clock and we're running out of time, and my poor health earlier this week did not help us out. So tomorrow, we're on it, okay? All right, have a good afternoon. Nice to see you all again, and I'll see you tomorrow.